Thanks. Hello and thank you for coming to this talk. We will talk a little bit about IT security compliance or about compliance management and what's possible to do there, and mostly how to do it right, because well, we will see what I don't like about how it's done usually. A little bit about me. My name is Adrian Wiesmann. I'm working as an IT security officer in a Swiss financial institute. And yeah, I like to bother, and I think I like to help out in making things more secure. The agenda of my speech. First, I will cover the problems I see with compliance management. Then I will introduce some solving strategies, how we do it, how I think it should be done, a few solutions, and what could be done as well if there would be some more resources to develop these. But first, a few words about the motivation, why I'm doing this talk, why I'm doing compliance management at all. I think we should do things simple. During my daytime, I'm having quite many things to do, and I'm not having that much time to loon around or to, don't know, make things more complicated than they should be. So my main motivation is to remove the overloads, to make things simple. But let's dive into the problems with compliance management. Problem number one for me is the amount of controls, which means you have that asset owner or that custodian, and he has to follow some controls, and usually, that's my experience, asset owners don't really know what they have to do. They run to the security officer and ask him or her. So it's usually just too much for them. There are also more questions like controls are written in authority documents. The lingo authority documents means an authority document is a document which contains controls, which tell you what to do. So there are very many authority documents, and usually you don't know which ones are relevant for you. Usually you don't know which ones are relevant in your current situation. Usually you don't know how these controls affect you in your current environment or your company, and usually these change, and you don't really get it when they change, and so you lag behind a version or two or whatever. So it's just too much. The second problem I see is the disorder. You have these many authority documents, you have these controls, and they sometimes have some overlaps. You have some controls which nearly say the same, but don't really, which completely state different things. And again, you don't really know what does this mean for my environment, what does this mean for my assets I do have, if you know what assets you have. I just heard that there are companies which don't even have a network map, so not that I'm surprised, but it's always surprising to hear it, that it's really true. There's also the question, if you know what assets you have, who is responsible for them? With a network scan, you usually see which machines you have, but not who's responsible for them. So this order is about, you have these controls, you have your assets, but you don't really know how this matches together. Then an authority document changes a version, the controls change, you have some overlaps, you do things twice, and you don't really recognize that you do it twice. You need an internal document management system where you track these authority documents, etc., etc. Yeah, usually this means there's just one guy tracking that stuff. and we don't, at least at the company I work for, we don't really have the time to have one person only doing that. And one of the bigger problems is compliance isn't cool. That's at least what the cool boys say. You probably you've probably seen that film where that guy is sitting on a motorbike, and then he's putting all the leather on because that's what's making him secure. So he has some boots, he has a jacket, he has a helmet and stuff. And then he's sitting on the bike and says, well, okay, now I'm secure, but what do I really need to wear? And at the end, he's only wearing, as you see on the right side, a helmet and some sunglasses and some shorts. So what they say is, or what the film or the movie says is, the right thing is compliance, the left thing is security, and compliance isn't really what you usually wear on a motorbike, except you're American, I guess. But over here, usually you wear the left thing. And what I really think is, many are laughing about this movie, but they actually miss the point. Of course, compliance management, you can do compliance management just as it's written in the book. Just do X, Y, Z, whatever, and don't even think about it, just do it. Many companies do it like that. There are PCI compliant companies which were cracked, so compliance doesn't really help you there. But I think compliance management should be about more than just following the letters in the books or in the authority documents. To do compliance management correctly, you should know what's your company about. I heard a speech recently which said you should know, if you don't know what's the, how is it called, the sentence which states what your company does. Just don't get it right now. So if you don't know the sentence of your company, you don't really know what's your company about. I don't really think that's true, but at least you should know what does your company, what's important for your company, which assets are really important for your company, what is your environment about, what is your company about, as I said before, what assets do you have, why do you have them? Perhaps you have them, but you don't really need them. And much more important, how do they play together? And the problem number 4 is, at least, and that was the flaming slide I just recently promised, many miss the point. If you look at literature, white papers, other documents, sources, nothing much has changed in the last few years, if at all. You do it, you take the authority documents and you do it like it's stated there, but don't really think about how you can make it simpler or how you could make it so that your company really can profit from this. And we sat there and thought about this and noticed that it's actually time to change, and we started a project which we thought, okay, then we have some kind of organization where we can put in everything we do. And when I say we, this means SOMAP. SOMAP is an open source project which means Security Officers Management and Analysis Project. And we started this because we worked, and not only worked as users, but also as developers with tools which do risk and compliance management. And we just noticed, without naming names, but there's a German product which where you model your whole environment and everything, and we weren't that happy with these tools, and so we thought, okay, we start our own project and try to work on that topic. The main goals we had when we started. The goal one was we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So we wanted just to focus on what had to be changed and leave everything else. Don't reinvent any software which is already there. Just, as I mentioned in the beginning, keep it simple. Which is also the goal number 2. Simple, simple, simple. Make it easier to use, make it easier to follow, make it less complicated to manage, etc. And very important, we wanted to think outside of the box. So we didn't really follow paths which were already walked by others. We wanted to try to find some way around the main paths. And our approaches, if it would scroll. We had a few strategies, and let's talk about these few strategies. We knew we had to write software because we wanted to automate things. We wanted to take away the workload from ourselves and put it into software. So first we thought about a data model, and it was right at the beginning it was quite clear that we had to work with aggregation, or you could also call it deduplication. And if you look at this slide here, on the top you have these are just examples, there could be many else or many more. You see these authority documents like ISO 27000, COBIT, PCI DSS, and all of these contain controls. And what we wanted to do is take these controls and just aggregate them, so at the end we have some aggregated controls. As I mentioned before, no duplicates. And to do so, there are quite a few strategies or ways to do so. And at the beginning, we thought it's much more easier than it was at the end. But let's first talk about the strategies. If we have these catalogs at the beginning, you see that there could be double namings. But the first strategy was, if you have catalogs which don't have any doubles, just remove these duplicates, and at the end you have an aggregated catalog. That's the easiest way, but unfortunately it doesn't work all of the time, because the catalogs usually have some intersections. So the second strategy was, you take a master catalog and then you just add the stuff which is not already in there. And at the end you have an aggregated catalog. Unfortunately, this doesn't work that great as well, because there's some weighting in these catalogs. Some catalogs have controls which are stronger than other controls from other catalogs, which means if you look into a PCI DSS, it states what you need to log, as example, and ISO doesn't state what exactly you have to log. So you have to look after these weightings. And so the next strategy came to mind, which is the weighting strategy. So you take that catalog, or these catalogs, you remove duplicates, you do the weighting, which control is stronger than the other ones, you take the strongest, and at the end you have an aggregated catalog. A friend of mine did this for 3 catalogs. He had quite some time to do so, and the problem is, or really is, it doesn't scale. Which means if you have 4, 5, 6, 7 catalogs and they have intersections, it doesn't really work. So, well, it does work, but it is royal pita at the end. So there's, luckily, there's even a newer strategy. We found a company which does this aggregation, and it's called the Unified Compliance Framework. and they do nothing else than they just take authority documents, they do that aggregation, or they do that mapping stuff, and at the end they have their aggregated catalog and they sell it. The thing there is, they have about 300 or 400 authority documents, that they really are able to do it, to build an aggregated catalog. They had to reinvent their own. So there's 401st catalog, which contains all of the others with cross-references. But the cool thing is you have these cross-references. So if you follow their catalog, you have all the controls aggregated and deduplicated as you would like it. But first we thought, okay, that could work. We could just buy that catalog from UCF and import it into our tool and just use it as it is. Unfortunately, you even need there some handwork. So at the end, you need to know what are you doing, which of these controls are really relevant for you, how do you map it to your controls, etc. And the worst of all, if you have some internal catalogs or authority documents, they're not in there, of course. So one of our strategies was to just throw the internal ones out and only use external ones, because then we don't have to track them anymore, the internal ones, or to map them or whatever. Yeah, and UCF is really cool without doing too much commercial for them. They have about these 400, as I said. There are also European ones, even they are American company, and they have 2-3 other things in their catalog to which I will come back later. So our second strategy was self-assessments. We thought about we had to look after the compliance level of our company. And strategy one was doing interviews. And the literature normally says do interviews, go to every asset owner or custodian and ask him about the compliance level of his asset. We have about 130 or 40 at the company I work. We have about 130, 40 assets. This means per asset you will usually have 2 hours of interview, which makes about 200 hours of interviews. Only interviews. You haven't done any. You haven't worked on the results. You didn't do any reporting on it. It's just 200 hours of interviews, which isn't really a solution, or which wasn't really a solution for us. So self-assessment. Even we knew, or we still know, that self-assessments aren't that perfect. Asset owners usually rate their assets better than they are, but if you know it, it doesn't really matter anymore. So we again, and when I say we again, with SumUp, we looked again at our data model we had already, and we said, okay, so we add audit questions and assets to the model we already have. And the audit questions are just one-to-one mappings to the controls, so every control has a question to it, like do you log, as example, or do you write logs? And we also mapped the controls to assets, which means if you take the asset web server, you can, with a simple query, look up which controls are relevant for that asset. So an asset owner only sees his relevant questions. The last time we did self-assessments, these were about 30 questions for a system owner, or 30 or 40 questions, instead of having 120, 130, whatever, which reduces the time quite a bit. The third strategy is the metadata model. So we went and did that model, which is over here. These are actually 2 separate, like sectors or something. The upper one is called the model, the lower one is called instance. And the model part is actually like, you know it from developing. The upper one is the class, the lower one is the instance. So the upper one could be shared amongst different companies, and the lower one contains the data from your environment, which you usually want to keep safe and not share with anyone else. Let's look at these several objects over there. The standard objective and the objective aggregate is the stuff we already talked about before. It's just the whole authority documents and controls in there with the audit questions and what we call the asset template. And an asset template is actually just the model of an asset, like a web server. It doesn't say which one, but it says web server. And on the instance part, we have that assessment. Compliance contains the answers to the questions. And at the end, on the right side, there's an asset. And the asset is the real instance. It's that web server down there below the table or wherever you have it. Then you also map a subject and rows and stuff just to make sure that you know who's the asset owner and who has to fill out the assessment, etc. What we also have is an inventory because we said, okay, usually a company has an asset management system in place. We don't want to remodel it here like with the German software I mentioned before. Let's use what's already there, just import it into our tool and use it from there. What we then thought about was that actually, if we have that data model or that meta model, we could use it for other things as well. And the first thing which came into mind was risk assessment. Let's look again at the model we have, this time a little bit with some changes in it. On the upper left side, again, you see objective, safeguard, or objective at least. I removed the other tables. And what we added was just a threat, a safeguard, and a scenario, and again, an asset template, which means an asset template and a threat together give a scenario, an attack scenario, if you want so, and every objective has some safeguards, and if you map this together and you do some and you use the tables on the lower side, you just can do your risk calculations on your assets with the controls we already know. You can map the safeguards, etc. And you have, with the same or nearly the same data model, you can do some quite nifty risk assessment. Which is also great because the informations you have from the risk assessment you can reuse on the self-assessment. The data model is built so that you can do some history, look at the last assessments and do some comparisons to see if they became better or worse with their compliance level. And what we also said is we don't want to do any silly calculations. And if I say no silly calculations, I mean there are some tools which do percentages for to track the realization of controls. I'm not sure, but I don't know what it means. I log 50%. I really have no idea what this means. So what we said is, okay, either you do the logging, you plan to do it, or you don't. Anything else doesn't really matter. If you have 30% of your log or 40, I don't really care. Either you have it or you don't. And if you don't, you're not compliant, and that's all. We don't do anything on so-called best practice or good practice. Well, good practice, okay, but not best practice. Usually best practice is something which a few guys came together and wrote it down. We think it could make sense somewhere, but usually not in your environment or your company, because they don't know your company. They don't know what you do and what your company is about. So you can take best practice, but then you have to adapt it to the company. So one of our goals or strategies is to not do anything on best practice. What we also didn't want to do was anything magic. Just like I said, with these risk calculations, magic for me is my risk factor is 5. And I have a 5 because I count twice 1.5 or something, or twice 2.5. What does this really mean? I have no idea. You say the likelihood is 2 and the impact is a 3. Okay, but you don't really know what this means. And if somebody else does it, probably has a likelihood of 1, and you don't really know where's the difference. We played around, or I played around with that threat agent library from Intel, where you have like a CVSS system. You have some factors which are not based on numbers. So we really try to do things without magic. And there's actually a compliance management tool which has a solitaire game in it. We think it's okay to have a solitaire game. I like to have it on my phone, but I don't really like to have it in my compliance tool because I don't really need to do solitaire. Probably I could do with the solitaire, I could do the risk calculations. If I win, it's a 2. If I lose, it's a 1 or something. Anyway. What I talked about is things we currently do, which we, for the company I work for, that financial institute, which we use since 3 years. This December we will use it the 4th time. And I'm taking the know-how from there and trying to apply it somehow or to refine it to add it to SOMAP. So it's not something I just invented here and presenting here. It's really something some guys are working on and already used it. From where we are and where we want to go to. As I said before, I want to make things simple. And one of the things which we could make simpler is a self-assessment is actually answering something. Most of the cases you know the answer already, or you could know the answer already. I wrote up here metrics. The screenshot I have here is from metricscenter.net. What they do there is they have, on the left side, they have these authority documents or some authority documents. And for some of the controls, they have metrics in there. So you don't really have to reinvent the wheel, just look in there and apply them to your environment, or first find out if it makes sense to apply them. The idea behind that is that questions you ask on the assessment or the self-assessment could actually be answered already by a clever metrics management system, or questions could be answered by metrics you already have or you could easily get. And the idea behind that is to just remove even more work from the asset owner, so they don't have to answer things which are clear. What's cool about the UCF I mentioned before is they have metrics. And they already map these metrics to their controls. And what's best of it, they also have some examples how to represent those metrics in graphics. So you don't even have to think there. Just apply it, find out if it makes sense for you, and if it does, take it over. This is one of the ideas we have and which we would like to integrate in our tool, some automated metric import, whatever. We're not there yet. Another thing we wanted or we would like to add is evidence. And evidence is actually something which the asset owners asked about. They filled out the self-assessment and said, we would like to store documents, we would like to store references, links, whatever. And at least with ISO, the authority document, it's with PCI as well. You are required to prove that you did something. So you have to have like a hardening document or whatever. And they really like, the asset owners really would like, at least with us, to add these documents to the application or somewhere. And the problem there is we could actually build up a new document management system or something and link everything, or we could just outsource it to a tool which does that much more better. And I'm not sure where to go there, so if you have an idea, please come up later and tell me your perfect idea. It makes sense to store actual snapshot of a document to prove that you did it, but it doesn't make sense to store it in that document, in that tool, because it's not a document management system. So that would actually be some help for the asset owners as well. So if the auditor, the real external auditor, comes to them and asks them for proof that they are compliant with control XY, they just can forward him or her to the tool and say, there it's written how we do it. And they have everything ready to show the auditor, the external. Yeah, actually, that's about it. I'm ready for questions.